Hi everyone, this is Andrew Primer, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 124 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the second week of July 2024. Today we're going to talk about the Russian barbaric attack on Kiev Children's Hospital, killing several children. NATO summit results, what allies promised Ukraine, and we're going to talk about why Russia called Washington. On Monday, July 8th, Russia attacked the children's largest hospital in the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. The Russian forces strike on multiple cities in Ukraine July 8, 2024, killed at least 42 civilians, including 5 children, and injuring at least 190 people. The attack also caused significant damage to vital infrastructure, including the Ahmadi Children's Hospital in Kiev, the country's largest children's hospital. So, the director of the hospital told the UN that the strike severely damaged several departments, including the intensive care units and oncology and surgical wings, and completely destroyed the toxicology and traumatology departments. The director, who also said that hundreds of children, including those undergoing daily treatment, were evacuated immediately after air raid sirens that went around 10 o'clock in the morning, which saved their lives. When the first rocket hit the premises of the hospital, less than an hour after the sirens went off, patients and staff were still in the hospital, including 3 patients undergoing heart surgeries. 10 children were injured in the attack. On July 10th, the Ukrainian health ministry reported that a child who had been evacuated from Ahmadit Hospital intensive care unit in a critical condition had died in another hospital. That was a 7-year-old Yegor Zavadetsky, who was in a coma at Ahmadid Hospital during a Russian missile strike on July 8th and died after being transported to another hospital after the damages. Yegor had an operation that lasted 9 hours. 2 days later, they operated him again. After that, the child was in coma for almost 11 days, his mother said. After the rocket hit the hospital, the boy was transported to the Kiev's cardiac center. When the rocket hit the hospital lost all the electricity. The child was not hurt, but due to the strike, the hospital was totally out of the power, which led to turning off all the life supporting machines that caused the death of the child. He was transferred to another hospital. He stayed in the cardiology hospital for 2 more days and then died. Many of Russia's attacks in Ukraine have resulted in immense civilian loss and harm, and the July 8th attack only added to that horrendous toll. Attacks directed at medical facilities are war crimes under international humanitarian law, and the strike on the Kiev's hospital should be investigated as a potential war crime. Since Russia commenced its full scale invasion of Ukraine, at least 1,736 medical facilities in Ukraine have been damaged or destroyed. On March 9, 2022, a bomb airdropped by a Russian force had landed in one of the country yards of Mariupol's Hospital Number 3, damaging maternity and pediatric units and killing and injuring patients and staff. So the latest barbaric attack of Russian terrorists had a drastic damage of facilities and killing innocent people. So right after that, the NATO called together all the NATO members to discuss the situation. but unfortunately, Western allies still indecisive how to proceed and what allow Ukraine to do in order to defend itself. So let's talk about the NATO summit results. What the NATO summit gave and didn't give Ukraine. So the NATO summit in Washington is the 11th since the beginning of Russian aggression in Ukraine in 2014, and the third annual since the full-scale invasion in 2022. Like the 10 previous ones, this summit took incremental steps to meet the challenges of the first large-scale war in Europe since defeat of Adolf Hitler. Of course, there was a progress, but it was neither substantial nor decisive. The positive thing is that the communique clearly states that Russia remains the most significant and direct threat to the security of the alliance. But the question is what steps NATO took last week to overcome this threat. The first concern the interpretation of Ukraine outer relations. It is an indisputable fact that neither Ukraine nor Europe will be safe until Ukraine joins NATO. Yes, the communique states the decision on Ukraine's membership is irreversible. It presents the steps aimed at strengthening cooperation, the mission of high ranking NATO representatives to Kiev, the introduction of the training programs for Ukraine, and the creation of a new platform for cooperation within the framework of Ukraine NATO Council. But these steps are modest in contrast with more significant temporary advantages that Sweden and Finland enjoyed before the membership. For example, why cannot the ambassador of Ukraine to NATO participate in the work of the North Atlantic Council? And why can't Ukrainian officials work in the NATO apparatus? Perhaps this explains why the head of the Office of President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, expressed concern at another public forum about how he would evaluate the summit before admitting that Ukraine was satisfied. In contrast to those modest steps, the best results of the summit were the security agreement signed by Ukraine with NATO members and partners. While these agreements do not replace NATO Article 5 protection, in some cases, such as the agreement signed with Poland, they provide additional air defense capabilities to Ukraine. When it comes to actual arms deliveries, the most pressing need which NATO allies committed to at the ground at and around the summit, the picture is also positive. The new packages include five Patriot batteries and other sophisticated defense systems, Abram tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles, and F 16 fighter jets. Taken together, this will be a significant boost to Ukraine's defense capabilities, even if it's a long overdue and a powerful signal to Russia about NATO's support for Ukraine. This positive story, unfortunately, was overshadowed by the provocation of Russian President Putin carried out just before the start of the summit. A blatant missile attack on Ukraine and Kiev, where in particular a missile hit a children's hospital, as we explained previously. This was done to destabilize NATO and show the Ukrainians how vulnerable they are. The United States could use this as incident against Putin if it took the opportunity to lift all restrictions of the use of American weapons against target in Russia. Currently, such strikes are limited to border areas on targets planning imminent attacks. Instead, the White House has publicly announced that its restrictions remain in place, a decision that is bad for both the people of Ukraine and the US leadership. So, a little bit more details. NATO promised the irreversible path in others. On July 2032, countries have approved the final declaration of the Alliance Summit in Washington. Among other things, NATO country pledged to allocate 40 billion in aid to Ukraine in 2025 and confirmed that Ukraine's path to membership in the alliance is irreversible. So, not NATO will continue to support Ukraine on the irreversible path to full Euro Atlantic integration, including NATO membership, while Ukraine continues its vital work on necessary democratic, economic, and security reforms. At the same time, the alliance recognized concrete progress that Ukraine has achieved after the Vilnius summit in the direction of these reforms. NATO also emphasized that Ukraine is becoming increasingly integrated with the alliance politically and operationally. So, also, the alliance will be able to send Ukraine an invitation to join when NATO members reach an agreement and conditions are met. The declaration calls the decision of the NATO summit and the Ukraine NATO Council in conjunction with the current work of the alliance members, a bridge to Ukraine's membership in NATO. So, allies will continue to support Ukraine's progress in interoperability with NATO, and NATO foreign ministers will continue to evaluate additional democratic and security reforms. So, what else? The Ukraine has the right to beat the Russian Federation. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that Ukraine should have the right to strike with Western weapons on territory of Russia because this is provided for its right to self defense. He stated this at a press conference last week. Speakers of the U.S. House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, said that he supports giving Ukraine permission to strike with Western weapons on the territory of Russia. Also, agreement with Romania. During the NATO summit in Washington, Ukraine President Zelensky and his Romanian counterpart Klaus Iohannis signed a bilateral security agreement. According to the agreement, Romania will transfer the Patriot systems to Ukraine and will also facilitate the faster possible transit of all necessary equipment through its territory to Ukraine. And the last piece, the F 16 fighter jets will be sent to Ukraine and they'll be used in Ukrainian skies by the end of the summer 2024. This was confirmed by Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba. So something is not going on. Something is going on in Russia, and that is not a good thing. Russia is worried, initiated a phone call with the US. So why did Ministry of Defense of Russia call Lloyd Austin in the US? For the second time in a month, the head of Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, and the Russian Minister of Defense, Andrei Belousov, had a telephone conversation. Moscow admitted that it initiated the conversation. So, what could be so important? So, they probably discussed the fact that decision to deploy American missiles until 2026 on the territory of European countries was already made, and the missiles are more modified than the earlier Pershing II. And this was a key topic in the 1980s when the USSR back in the day was very alarmed that these Pershings were located on the territory of European countries and could reach the Soviet Union. And now these missiles will have a flight time between 1.5 to 2 minutes to important military facilities of Russian Federation. At one time, Russia broke the treaty on the conventional armed forces of Europe and medium and short range missiles. Now it's time to pay for that. And the fact that the intentions of the Americans in this regard are serious is what caused the disaster in Moscow. And now they don't know what to do because they cannot respond with their so called missiles. Because these missiles, as we can see, have very weak tactical and technical indicators and they will be shot down like targets in a shooting range. And there is no other form of protection. Therefore, this com- so this was manifested in Moscow that they are looking for ways to understand somehow what will happen to agree, what they can agree or negotiate to. In a word, this is a significant strategic move that can affect Russia's position. In the case of Washington's intran- in case of Washington intransigence on these missiles, Russia will be under very serious pressure. And there, although now they say we will answer, but there is nothing to answer with. So there will be additional bases, particularly in Poland. And if those rockets are placed in Poland, Russia is truly in trouble. So therefore, rather sad times are coming for Russia. And if we still understand what is happening to the Russian economy, then in a year and a half, the regime will collapse. As you see, after 2.5 years, Russia already is looking weak and exhausted all its weapons supplies and weapons production in Ukraine. So now this country is extremely weak, and if the United States will place those Pershing 2 rockets, so Moscow will be extremely vulnerable. Okay, I will give an example of visits of Indian Prime Minister Modi to Russia. All those who come to Putin or have some contact with him are the leaders of those countries who want to make money from our grief. Well, let's be honest without any diplomatic warning and hints. India is profiting from Ukraine in the literal sense of the word, buying cheap Russian oil. At the same time, it buys it cheap and at extremely large quantity. So this is actually a lot for Russia because these money help them to survive. The only issue is that India itself doesn't have much money. It wants to settle in rupees. Russia doesn't need so many rupees because they don't know what to do or what to buy in India with such amounts. You can only buy semi precious stones, but what to do with them? That is, so basically, it doesn't work well for Russia as well. And there is nothing else in particular. That's why this is a problem for Russia. Other politicians, such as Viktor Orban, are just trying to reserve a special place for themselves, just in case for the future, just in case for the future, if the war in Ukraine is protracted, if Russia achieves some result, and so on. That is, here I see the only logic of the actions of these politicians. This is the logic of earning money on our blood. I'm not talking about North Korea, I'm talking about China. This is what unfortunately they say the axis of evil is formed. The axis of evil encompasses the largest authoritarian regime in the world. However, the axis of good in the person of in in the in the face of NATO and the European Union continues to be pondering. One Russian columnist said how now lives in America wrote about the dementia and democracy. And this is an exact description of what is happening now. Because if this dementia covers the democratic world, we will end up with terrible consequences. The consequence will be the defeat of democracy before autocracy. No one needs to be explained what will happen then. This is especially clear to those countries that lived under the conditions of despotism, dictatorship, fascism, communism, and so on. Unfortunately, our Western partners, who have not experienced this for some reason, think that this is a theory. Well, I really don't want this theory to become a practice for all of us. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, please share with your friends.